All right. Well, hello everyone. And today we're going to be talking about the end of Antiquity. So basically up until 800 CE. But before that, I want to finish what we were doing last week, which was the classical empires, which was up to around 300 CE. So that last week we'd been talking about the big empires that most people remember. So Alexander, Iran, Rome, Han China, um, just the big ones. But so today we're actually first going to finish China, and then we're also going to go on to the Mauryans in India. So last time we were talking about the Han Dynasty, like the first real dynasty of Imperial China. So uh, last time we were beginning by talking about the Silk Road. So let's continue on that. So um, for Han China, the Han start going out west because the Han have a lot of goods to be able to produce. And not only do they have a lot of goods to. Okay, this is going to be weird because I want to. How do I show you the screen? um. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna be gesturing to things on the map, and it's just not really gonna work. Also, by the way, if this is gonna be the final recording, my brother is here. Um, so the Han have a massive population because it's China. And so that means that they have a lot of demands and then they have a lot of supply that they can send to other places, giving them a huge amount of potential for wealth if they can just find a market further west. So what the emperor does is he sends out a group of traders who go west into all of the states of Central Asia, and then as they continue, they pass through all these cities and start mapping it out. Over time, this kind of map of this route that these ambassadors take is eventually going to form into the Silk Road over several hundred years. Han China also invents paper, which is very, very important. Which, just imagine a world that doesn't have paper. Um, well, today we have computers, so I guess paper would be less relevant. But back then, it's the only way to be able to ensure that people in the future know what you're going, what's happening today, is through paper. So, also, at the time though, is that before this, a lot of states were using papyrus, but papyrus is very expensive and very hard to grow. So, by having paper, you create something that's cheap by basically just turning trash into something that's very, very, very useful. So, next, we're going to go on to India, back west. So, this we're going to be talking about the Mauryan Empire. Later in this presentation, we're going to be talking about the Gupta Empire. And it's all very confusing because Chandragupta, two people named Chandragupta established each of these empires. But for now, we're going to be talking about the Mauryans. So, yeah, here's India on the world map. It's way too small for reasons that I'm not going to go into. So, India, under the Maurya, is very, very powerful in the sense that the Mauryans are very, very aggressive because initially, what the Mauryans do is they actually run into Alexander the Great. Because if you remember Alexander the Great from last week, is that he goes very far east, all the way to the borders of India, and then turns around. And that means that there's a massive amount of territory that basically just doesn't have anyone defending it, at least until the Seleucids come. And so the Mauryans will actually go west and invade the Seleucids, if you remember them from the Iranian empires. And so they step into what's effectively called a power vacuum, where there's no troops because they're all heading west to go fight each other because these are the successors we're talking about. And so the Mauryans are going to be very successful in that. In the south, what they're going to be doing is a lot of alliances through marriage with local Indian states until they've effectively established what's effectively a tributary empire. So since in the actual class, now no one really knew what a tributary empire was, is essentially the Mauryans kind of work like a gang in the sense that they have a big army, and what you do to stop them from using that big army on you is you just pay them protection money over time. And that's where the Mauryans get a lot of their money, is just from that. Um, the Mauryans also make a lot of money through trade and especially through monopolies. So, since you guys also didn't really know what monopolies were, a monopoly is essentially like if you own all of the, say, silk, that means that no one else can try to sell silk at a lower price than you can. So, you can basically set the price of silk to be whatever you want, meaning that you can make a ton of money off of silk. And the Mauryans have a lot of monopolies under the royal family, and they also divide their whole kingdom into provinces since India is big and one person can't rule all of this. So they send basically essentially members of the royal family and use them to help govern all these provinces. Oh gosh, I don't know. This is kind of awkward. All right. So the one of the last, well, the last great Mauryan Empire is this guy named Ashoka. You can see him right over here, and so he rules the empire at its peak. He, as a very big empire, the Mauryans are forced just by like necessity to be very, very tolerant, given that at this time there are a lot of different kind of versions of Hinduism, because Hinduism is a big belief system, and it's not really one religion. Um, so the basically to control all of that, the Mauryans had to be accepting of pretty much all of those different kinds of sets of values. The more Ashoka will also really try to promote trade and also promote peace within his empire as part of just a way to help make sure that the empire can stay standing. Well, since he's the last great Mauryan empire, you can tell that he fails, but he really tries as hard as he can. He also does creates laws through what are called edicts, where he writes down the laws and then sends all of the people who can read out across the empire with all these little tablets where they read out the laws to everyone who can, well, to everyone, meaning that you can't ever really say that you didn't. That you didn't know that you were breaking the law, since now everyone's reading it to you pretty much every day. The Mauryans will end up falling apart because if you remember all of these provinces that are ruled by members of the royal family, is that all of these provinces then have their own claims to the throne, meaning that the Mauryans will end up splitting up into a bunch of tiny kingdoms at the end of, well, after Ashoka's reign. Her reign, because after Ashoka dies, he doesn't really have an heir who has the power to hold the whole kingdom together. So next we're gonna act. So that is the last part from week 3, and I'm gonna switch this over. So yeah, now we're gonna be going on to the end of Antiquity, the end of the classical era, which we're gonna say is around up to 800 CE. A lot of people are gonna disagree with this timeline, but it's all generally pretty arbitrary. So also a kind of an issue with this whole class in general is that there's a lot of focus on the Mediterranean and China, like a lot of focus on Eurasia, and part of that is just because like we don't have nearly enough time to cover everything. And we're going to diversify a lot more, especially as we get into the 1400s. But yeah, just like, bear with us for now. So we're going to go to China, which is number 1. So yeah, back to our old friends, the Han, and here's China on the map. So the Han Dynasty grows more and more corrupt as it continues. Things just start to break down, and eventually this big rebellion just destroys the empire and has it fracture into a bunch of warring states once again. So eventually, one of these warring states, the Jin, come out on top. They don't do very well, but then they get taken over by the Sui, who also don't do very well, where they fight a lot of wars and they lose a lot of wars. They break down and then the emperor dies, so then they get replaced by the Tang dynasty, who are going to be this little island of stability for China. So Tang China is the point at which China is actually the Middle Kingdom, 中国. I probably Jesus okay, and where China, if you remember how China just has a massive population, means that basically all goods in the world flow towards China. At least all the goods that can reach China flow towards China. It is going to be kind of the center of gravity of the entire world at this point. And a lot of this is just through it's through Tang bureaucracy, because the Tang because the Tang introduce civil service exams, which are they're what they sound like. You have to take an exam to be part of the bureaucracy. It's not, or be a part of the government. It's not because like you have rich parents, or because you're because like someone in your ancient past claimed descendants from a god. It's because, well, you did well at a test, which is so far the best way that we've found in all this to organize their state. They also start doing what's essentially proto-communism, where they ensure that this massive population actually has enough food to support itself by doing land distribution, where they give every peasant their own little plot of land to farm so that they don't starve, which is very good for stability. Because if you remember the Bronze Age collapse week, lack of access to food meant that the entire civilization just collapsed. They also re-standardize everything because China is big, as I've said many, many times, and they want to standardize coins to make to make trade and taxes easier. And they also standardize taxes because having a justice system that looks like a tapestry is a easy success is an easy pathway to getting your head chopped off by a bunch of disgruntled peasants. The Tang are also, as I said, like when I talked about them being the center of the world, are also just filled with lots and lots of foreigners who come into Tang ports with trade and all of that, and they introduce a lot of music and dance from other places into China, especially the capital. They also introduce a lot of poetry, and just generally a lot of artistic changes. Also, during the Tang, there's a very popular import from India, which is Buddhism. And the Buddhist monasteries in the Tang Dynasty are actually what are going to end up to be creating gunpowder, which is very important for later on in history. So after this, we're going to go on to Japan. So a bunch of the kids in my last class talked about Japan being or how to pronounce Japan. So Nihon or Nihon. Yeah, that's as far as I'm going to go before you all lynch me. And what that essentially means is that Japan calls itself the land of the rising sun, or the sun's origin, which doesn't really make sense, since clearly, like, if you ever go to Japan, you're going to very clearly see that you are not living on the sun when you visit Japan. So the reason why Japan is called the land of the rising sun is because the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So let's think about, for whom would Japan be the land of the rising sun? So if you just look at this map and go a little bit west, you run into China. So China names Japan. And this is very, kind of just indicative of all of early Japanese history, as in it's very China focused. You'll be able to see this later. So we're going to start with the Asuka period, starting in 538. There were Japanese governments and Japanese civilization before this, but we'd skipped those in the past weeks because we're already stretched for time. But what the Asuka do is they also introduced Buddhism, which has gone out of India, gone up through trade routes to China and to Korea, and then from Korea it spreads to Japan. And part of why the Japanese government really loves Buddhism is because Buddhism is very focused on kind of like what can I do specifically. Like, it doesn't really focus nearly as much as a bunch of other religions or belief systems on things that would be dangerous to the government, such as like equality or things like that. Buddhism is very chill, and having a very chill religion is a nice way to make sure that nothing really violent happens in your society. They also bring in a lot of Chinese government. They bring in the civil service exams, actually, though the civil service exams don't are kind of different in the sense that they're only available to rich people. But it it is like generally this early Asuka era Japanese government is basically like a copy paste of the of Han China or Tong China. I mean. Ooh. So next we're going to the Nara period, named after the capital of Nara. So at this point is kind of when Japan's culture starts to really show through as independent Japanese culture, not Chinese based culture. This will go into really high gear in the era that follows us, the Heian period. But this is where a lot of famous works of Japanese literature are produced, and then also where Japan's like pride of architecture comes in, which is Todaiji, the Buddhist temple with a massive bronze Buddha statue. I'm not sure if you can actually see like the original Todaiji today because of the American bombing campaigns in World War II, but what you see in Japan is probably a recreation, but it gives you a very good idea of just how immensely cool um, this temple was. I'm gonna skip the Heian period because that's more of a thing for post 800. But next we're gonna go into India. You've already seen where India is on the world map. So after the Maurya start exploding, the Gupta Empire, which is one of the tiny little states that succeeded the Maurya, end up just eating all of the rest of the Mauryan successor states. And the founder of this empire is also named Chandragupta, but there's no relation to the other Chandragupta of the Maurya. And the Gupta Empire is very, very centralized compared to the Mauryans. They don't really they don't really like have the province system, but this also comes as kind of a trade-off because the Gupta Empire is like it has to be dominated by one person, but obviously one person's control can't really extend that far in this era before the internet, before cars, before airplanes. So the laws like they go out, but unlike the Maurya, they're not really enforced. Just because it's impossible to hold this big of a territory with that kind of like iron grip. But the Gupta Empire, though, is kind of a golden age in Indian history. So this is where a lot of like the maths come in, like trigonometry. So for all of you guys who are in 6th grade, or actually probably 5th grade and 7th grade too, basically like past elementary, probably 5th grade onwards, we can thank the Gupta for trigonometry. Also, if you guys have heard of like Arabic number or Arabic numerals, which are the numerals that the numbering system that we use today, based off the name, you can tell that we got that from the Arabs, but the Arabs got those from the Gupta, as in the Gupta Empire. So because they call them Hindu numerals. This is also the time where a lot of like art and music flourishes, and especially where a lot of intellectuals can go around and debate and really turn like Hinduism from a very like spiritualistic belief system into something that is very, very, very complex and like philosophically very sound. But then, since we've been focusing mainly on northern Indian history, in the south there is the Chola Empire, which were one of the longest ruling empires in human history, where they might have existed at the time of the Maurya too, and they just kept on surviving. They built lots of temples, and they kind of find the base of the modern society of Tamil Nadu, or the southern India. So here's the map of like basically like how the Chola survive, and the whole Chola thing is just trade. They might look small on a map, but then you can see is that they have a lot of influence all over the Eastern Indian Ocean because their traders are just everywhere. And then that's how they just lasted so long, because they just have so much wealth that they're able to basically beat off anyone who tries to attack them, even if they might not be as powerful as, for example, the Gupta. So next we're going to go very, well, not very, but far west to the fall of Rome, or half of it, which is something very near and dear to my heart, as you guys can probably tell since a lot of you guys are in my Rome class. But so it's just, you can see like here is well, the Roman Empire. You can see that the Romans called themselves the Eternal City, or the Eternal Empire. And well, given by the title of the slide, you can probably tell that that's not going to last very long. So last time we'd been talking about the Roman Empire, we're talking about the beginning of Christianity, with Jesus getting executed, and the Roman and Christianity being kind of a cult for hippies in the Roman Empire. But this is by like around 300 CE. Roman religion is kind of falling out of fashion. So like part of this is because Roman religion is really irritating. Like if you're gonna like sacrifice a chicken to the gods, if you stab the chicken an inch away from where you're supposed to, you have to redo this whole like 2-hour ritual. No one wants to do that because no one remembers why any of these rituals started. So it all feels useless. No one wants to do them. And so people just kind of start abandoning things. And what they start finding much more interesting are all these cool, interesting mystery cults from the East, such as the Christians. Because Christianity is just way more attractive than old boring Rome. I mean, old boring like Jupiter. Because the whole thing about Christianity is that you can have eternal salvation. You can be, eternally blessed in the afterlife. And then you can also have like a real sense of purpose offered by Christianity, which is something that is missing from the old Roman religions. But at the start of this point, it's illegal to be a Christian for most of Roman history. So that's, kind of, well, stunting its growth. It's still spreading like wildfire because it's not enforced very often. But it takes the Emperor Constantine, this man with the very fabulous dress, to ensure that Christianity becomes the biggest religion in the world. And what Constantine does is he converts to Christianity, which as a Roman Empire emperor is very big. Because even though Constantine doesn't make Christianity the official the official religion of Rome, because Rome doesn't have one, he's Roman emperor. And if you remember, like, just how interconnected Rome was with all its roads, all its shipping, and control of the Mediterranean, is that this is basically the fast pass to spreading your religion everywhere. But after Constantine, or actually, before and after Constantine, is that Rome is having some very big issues with all of these things coming in to go attack the Rome, especially the Western Romans, as you can tell by this horrible mess over here. And so, Rome is not going to do so well. But just to keep in mind, like, how long this takes for Rome to kick the bucket, is that Rome, from the reign of Emperor Commodus onwards, the big decline and fall of the Western Roman Empire, so half of the Roman Empire, takes 294 years. By comparison, the United States has existed for less than 250 years. So the Romans just keep kicking. And it's honestly a very big surprise that they lasted as long as they did, which is just a testament to, Rome. So the first thing, if you remember the Bronze Age collapse episode, week, is always going to be lack of food. At this point, this is a period of global cooling as opposed to like global warming. And it's global drying too, which means that it's too cold for crops, it's too dry for crops, and no one has any food. No one can grow any food. And in an economy that relies basically entirely on food, this is very bad. there's going to be famines in Rome, and then there's going to be migrations in civilizations that have far less ability to organize and far less of a cushion than Rome does. So what that means is that all these other civilizations, the tribes, start to have to go west. And it's not just because of crop failure, because it's also because of this big new people called the Huns who are coming in from the east. They knock out all the tribes near the Roman border, and then the Romans, well, and then all these tribes go west. And there's a massive human tide that just crashes into the Roman lines or into the Roman borders. Because the Romans have a professional army that is big and strong, maybe at first this is you can deal with this on your own, on its own, but well, it's not on its own because here's something else. The emperors might having an empire is not the best way to do government because as soon as the emperor dies and as soon as the emperor doesn't have someone that they can leave the empire to, every general within army has a claim to the throne, and then they're going to use that army to push for the throne. So you're taking all of these expensive, like tens of thousands of expensive Roman soldiers that take years to train, and then they're all throwing them to kill other Roman soldiers. And because these are two Roman armies, this isn't like the Romans versus a bunch of shirtless barbarians. All of these fights are extremely even, and that makes them extremely brutal. And all of these troops that are either fighting each other or just like dying in these civil wars are soldiers who are not defending the borders against all these tribes. In addition to the civil wars, are the ancient world's equivalent of the world wars, which for Rome are the Persian wars. These are basically the wars between this part of the world's two great superpowers, the Sasanian Persians and the Romans. This is basically on a similar level to if America fought China today. It is big, it's brutal, and it's going to lead to the deaths of multiple Roman emperors, such as this guy right here, who gets stabbed because he gets attacked before he can get his armor on, and several Parthian kings, or Parthian and Sasanian Persian kings, which is bad, very, very bad for pretty much everyone involved. The Romans will actually keep slapping at the Persians, and the Persians will keep slapping back at the Romans, even past the fall of the West, all the way up until the rise of Islam. But that's for later. There's also what these armies from the Persian Wars bring home is the two plagues. Actually, there's the Antonine Plague and the Cyprian Plague, but both of these plagues are smallpox, and they kill something like 1/12 of the entire Roman population across the whole empire, which is more than the Spanish flu did to the global population. And even worse for the Romans is that since this plague was brought by the armies, it started in the armies, it's worse in the armies because all these guys are crowded together into a bunch of military camps, and it's just not the best place. Well, you can't exactly do social distancing in an army. Well, and then too, if you remember that the Romans also have another issue, because I think some of you guys might be wondering, well, why is it so bad for the Romans when they have all these like public baths? They should be clean and everything. But part of the issue is the rise of Christianity, because the Christians don't like the idea of a bunch of naked people getting together in a bathhouse. So they don't like public baths, meaning that the public baths start to close down and everyone gets filthier and filthier, and that just all makes plague so much worse. This is also bad, like not only because it's killing Roman soldiers, it's also bad because it's killing farmers who now can't pay taxes, and it's also killing people that you could potentially use to replace the dead soldiers. So all of these issues together and need to be paid for. you have less taxes now because a bunch of your taxpayers are dead, and because all of your farmers can't grow food. You have to replace all the soldiers who are being killed in battles against the tribes, all the soldiers being killed in battles against each other, and all the soldiers being killed in battles against the Persians, which is all very expensive for Roman soldiers who are, you can tell, like in this picture, just the sheer difference in equipment between Roman soldiers and everyone else. uh, it's very expensive. So what the Romans do is something that you should never do, but you can't really blame the Romans since they didn't know about this. But if you guys have ever wondered why we don't just print more money to to be able to do more things, is because we'll just look at Rome. Rome's economy, Rome's coinage is all silver, which makes it slightly different, but it's kind of the same thing. So what the Romans do is that they slowly, initially, decrease the amount of silver in their coins so that they can produce more coins to pay for more armies. But then what happens when all these things slap you at once? Well, to bribe the army to help fight for you in the Civil War, you need to pay them a lot of money. And so what they do is in the span of 30 years, they basically turn the Roman coinage from being around 40% silver to something that's less than 5% silver, making all these extra Roman coins practically worthless. Uh, if this doesn't sound too bad, because there's still more coins in circulation, is the fact that, let's say if you're someone in the 240s and you've just come away from your long life as a farmer with a very healthy life savings of, say, 300 Antoniani. Well, in 30 years, that is going to be worthless, because in this span of like 30 years, the price of bread is going to increase 50 times. So your 300 Antoniani are basically the equivalent of 6 Antoniani from before, which is bad. All of these things are what are required to bring down just the poorer half of the Roman Empire. And part of this, the reason. Oh, Jesus. I'm gonna go. Oh, okay. I'm gonna go to bed. All right. Okay. See you. All right. See you. Bye bye. Bye. Love you. Love you too. Yeah. Part of this is because part of the reason why only the West falls is because of this. You can see all of these are Roman civil wars or revolts or coups, or like as in like overthrowing the government. And all of these, though, in these 70 years, are all in the Western Empire, because in the East there are not going to be any civil wars for almost 200 years, which is very, very good for the East. Um, so now that the Western Roman Empire is gone, let's look at what is traditionally called the Dark Ages. I don't think that the Dark Ages are a thing, but let's take the place where the Dark Ages really are dark. Because in Britain, the Dark Ages are practically apocalyptic. Roman Britain, or England today, forgets how to read. It also forgets how to create pottery or make glass. And the whole reason behind this is because Roman cities and Roman civilization is very specialized. It's much more efficient to have an entire city dedicated to making, like, say, bricks, than like having bricks just spread out across the whole area, because having all these people who are concentrated together with all their expertise in brick making means that you can spread all their skills close together. Everything's just generally much more efficient. All the infrastructure is very nice. But what happens to your city that makes bricks when all the roads stop being maintained? And then suddenly there are raiders or bandits or criminals on all of the roads watching for anything you can deliver. What are you going to do? Who are you going to sell bricks to? Who are you going to buy food from? It just doesn't work. You have to leave the city, and that explains like why in Britain all these cities get abandoned and people like just have to go into basically like farm life, which doesn't require like reading or pottery really, or as in, well, it would be easier with both of those things, but there's no way to support a city that makes pottery. So in Britain, this is basically the Bronze Age collapse all over again. But in France and Spain and Italy, it's much easier because uh, because the barbarians who go into this area um, go through what's called Romanization, and it is what it sounds like, as in because there's all this nice Roman bureaucracy lying around and all these really nice Roman cities, the local barbarians are like, we should keep these things. These are good things. So over time, they do keep those things, and they become more and more Roman, meaning that not actually that much changes between these regimes and the Romans. The big difference is that, well, everything is still like less efficient than the Romans were, and then also just that all these much smaller states tend to fight each other much more than the Romans did. Though, given the amount of Roman civil wars, probably the difference is probably not that big. Um, but as you can see, that it's very complicated. You can't say the whole thing is Dark Ages. Um, and as you'll be able to see, like as I'll probably hammer a lot later, is in the East, the Roman Empire is still there. The light of Rome still burns. For them, if you ask them about a fall of Rome, they'd look at you funny. Because the Romans are still around, something that gets forgotten way too often. So, yeah, as I was saying, the East is Rome's richest provinces. Not only that, is that geographically, things go much better for them. As if you remember that map from earlier, all those barbarian tribes are going in from over here, because that's like the biggest front line is. But then they go into the East far less, because a lot of the East is protected by, sea, and then mountains over here, and then also the Persians in the East, who, while they're not exactly like the best neighbor, they're pretty good. And then in the South, it's desert, which protects them. Well, it's what protects them for now. Um, so, Rome or Constantinople, it becomes the new capital of the Roman Empire. If you remember Constantine, the Christian emperor from earlier, is that Constantinople is his city, and it's right here. And the big thing about this surviving Roman Empire in the East is, if you remember last week, where he talked about the advantages of the Mediterranean, as in it's like way easier to ship things around, everything is cheaper to communicate, and all that makes and that makes the Roman Empire rich. So like all of that stuff still applies, even if less of the Mediterranean is under Roman control. You can see like a lot of it still is. And then Egypt, Syria, Anatolia, Greece, North Africa, these are the Roman Empire's richest areas. A lot of places, such as Britain, had actually been making less money than they were costing to protect. But then the East has a ton of money, which makes it very much, much easier to protect, as now you can support a lot more soldiers. And so the Roman Empire now spends a lot of time trying to reclaim all these Western provinces. And they also spend a lot of time fighting the Sassanids, like far, far too much time and energy spent fighting the Sassanids. And the Sassanids and the Romans will keep beating at each other for, 200 years, up until the Arabs come out of the desert and surprise everybody. You'll see that later. So as you can tell here, the Romans are doing very well for themselves after the fall of Rome. Yeah, they it's all going pretty well. Here is a picture of Constantinople, where it's like, wow, this city is doing very well for itself. And the part of the reason why Constantinople works so well, because if you look at this map, Constantinople is a great place to be. Not only is it like the center of the rich empire, it's also the point where you have to cross over if you want to trade from east to west, which is super valuable. And also it's where well it also means that you can also exert influence over all this trade from China that's coming in as a result of like the Proto Silk Road, which is very, very, very valuable. Like when the Romans and the Persians aren't killing each other, they're also trading too, and both of them are very rich. So this helps just make them richer, and it's all very good. Constantinople is probably the best place in the world to build a city. It is amazing. As you can also tell that Constantinople is surrounded on three sides, some would say four sides, by water, which is incredibly good because it means that you only have one side that you really need to protect, the part that's like facing land. And it's also, if you remember how expensive land travel is and how much better naval travel is having the city surrounded by water is great for trade. So next, we're going to go to an area that a lot of people at the time had not really thought about. This is the Arabian Peninsula, right over here. This is the crossroads of the world. It's been called the Middle East. The east part doesn't really make sense, but the middle part certainly does. You can have trade from India. You can have trade from China. You can have trade from East Africa. You have trade from the Romans. It's all going through this. It's great to live, or not to live, but it's extremely valuable. So because part of the issue is that a lot of it is desert. So neither the Romans nor neither the Romans nor the Sassanids or Sasanians can really control it. And not only that what they instead do is they use them as allies to fight each other with. So it's dominated by between these two great powers. It's not really its own big thing yet. Also, if you remember, like when I was talking about with the trade earlier, is that there's a lot of Hindu traders from India. There's Zoroastrians from Persia. There's Jews from Judea. There's Christians from the Roman Empire, and they're all coming together here, as well as all the local religions. And you'll see that Islam, in many ways, is kind of a fusion between like Judaism, Christianity, and the local religions. And the people of the Arabian Peninsula are called Bedouins. Not all of them are nomads, but the ones who really matter today are. And so living in the desert is it's hard. You guys, I'm not sure if you guys have watched Dune. I'm not watched, though it is a movie that's coming out soon, but read Dune. Well, basically living in the desert is on its own a kind of training because it's very hard to survive. And that makes the Bedouins very prized soldiers. The Romans and the Sasanians hire them to serve in their armies, which is going to be very important later on. So very like family centered, and though the big thing is they're very, very patriarchal. And so this is actually where we get a lot of the idea of like Islam being very like oppressive towards women. But a lot of that actually comes from Bedouin society, which is where Islam came from, but not necessarily Islam itself. But yeah, just remember that they've been serving as soldiers in the world's two strongest militaries, which is going to be very important as we continue. But let's talk a little bit about Islam itself. So it starts with this guy named Muhammad. Muhammad is what's called the seal of the prophets, because Muslims Islam comes from the same religious group as Judaism and Christianity. Muslims believe in Abraham and in Jesus. Just the difference is that, between Islam and Christianity is that Jesus for Muslims isn't the son of God. And also Muhammad, he's just one more prophet, and then also Muhammad is the last prophet. So Islam is also based around like a lot of like two main things. The Quran, which is like the first thing, and it's the word of God. It's very mysterious at times, and it's oftentimes very vague. Like there's you've probably seen like the whole issue of what exactly jihad entails, and there are parts of the Quran that talk about like fighting against pagans. But then also there is also like the idea that jihad is also just struggle. Not everyone who is a Muslim is going to be like is going to want to like fight people, because a lot of jihad can also just be inner struggle, and it's all very complicated and very vague. So to help like decipher that, there are the hadiths, which are like the teachings, the sayings of Muhammad and Muhammad's life story. um is Muhammad is all is also kind of like enigmatic, and all of this is going to require a lot of like judges and a lot of people and a lot of very intelligent people and scholars over time to help decipher. It's it's, I guess, as complicated as any other religion. So I don't know if you guys are into Avatar: The Last Airbender, but well, here we go. So, long ago, the two nations lived together in harmony, if you disregard nearly a century of warfare. But everything changed when the Caliphate attacked. Only the imperial armies, masters from all three continents, could stop them. But when the world needed them the most, they vanished. Okay. But so essentially, the Romans and the Sasanians had been fighting each other for around 100 years. And, as I've been saying before, these are basically the ancient worlds of world wars. And they devastated the Eastern Roman Empire. And, there's been all this fighting, and all these armies have been like smashing against each other. It's been costing tons of money, costing tons of lives. And it's weakening both of the empires dramatically. Not only this, is that there are a bunch of Arabs serving in both armies. And when they come home, they're going to bring in a lot of knowledge of how both of these armies work. Um, so yeah, and also like this war isn't just like a border war. This is a life and death struggle. You can see that there is that the Romans attack the Persian capital at Ctesiphon, and the Persians attack the Roman capital at Constantinople. It's very important and very, very deadly. Before the Arabs even come out of the desert, the Roman Empire actually comes very close to just collapsing entirely. So when Islam actually comes out, well, it beats pretty much, well, literally everyone, from Spain to even China. So it's in kind of like three main phases. The first phase is under Muhammad, where they're unifying the Arabian Peninsula under the Muslims. The second part is this 17-year period in which, just in 17 years, that's like incredible. The the Muslims beat the two world's biggest superpowers apart from Tong China. They conquer the Sasanian Empire entirely, and they take over 2/3 of the Roman Empire. And not only do they take 2/3 of the Roman Empire's land, but they take the Roman Empire's richest provinces, meaning 3/4 of its wealth. And after that, they conquer an empire spanning from Spain all the way to Afghanistan, which is something that which not even Alexander was able to do. They also won a battle against even Tong China in the east in 751. And in this battle is actually how we get paper, because the Arabs capture a bunch of paper and the secrets of how to make paper from the defeated Chinese army. That's just how the story works. It's all very nebulous. So you can see how this all works. It's very, very fast. So you're probably wondering, how do they do this? How do you beat not only the world's two biggest superpowers, but also just all of this? How do you control all of this? Well, The whole reason is because the Muslims, like Alexander the Great, follow the same kind of model, where they just don't really care about what you do as long as you pay taxes and, supply their armies with troops, and well, then you're done. It's not all. It's very very chill, especially from people who've been coming from the old Roman Empire, especially for the Jews, because these initial Muslim conquerors don't really care about converting people or anything, so they don't want to. But you know who really does want to convert people? The Christians, and who they really don't like are the Jews. So at the time that the Muslims came in to the Roman Empire, the Romans had just beat down two Jewish rebellions and were going through the process of genocide, of like basically an early Holocaust, which is terrible. So the Jews really welcome the Muslims, and even though they have to pay like slightly higher taxes, um, the compared to the Romans, that's great. Also, another thing about the Roman Christians is that they were very focused on very small Christian things. Since if the whole idea is like if you're worshiping God wrong, maybe you're going to go to hell, and no one wants to risk that. So there were all these fights about like the nature of Jesus. Like, was Jesus God? Was Jesus just like a person who had some of God in him? Was Jesus entirely God? How many natures does Jesus have? Does Jesus have three? Does Jesus have three natures? Does Jesus have three energies, which is somehow different? All of this is very confusing, but what it did do is it made people very angry at each other. In Egypt, especially, the locals were very annoyed at the government in Constantinople because they were all fighting about Christianity. Since the Muslims aren't Christians, they didn't care about any of this, which made things much nicer. And then you can also just remember that the Muslims had a training in the two world's two best armies, and then also just training from life in the desert, which allowed them to go through areas that a lot of places had considered impassable. Since living in the desert, like the desert soldiers of the Muslims were able to cut through a lot of holes in Roman and Persian defenses, where the Romans and the Persians didn't think that those areas could be crossed, but then the Muslims crossed them and hit the Romans and the Sassanids where they weren't expecting it. You also see as they go east and west is that they're also going into a lot of desert territory. So over time, the Arabs become more and more. Oh wait, shoot. Let me check. Oh wait. Oh yeah, something else I should mention. So the just for like I guess an idea of how fast all this is 128 years of history in which Islam conquers a substantial portion of the world, or the Arabs, really, not really Muslims yet. But I guess it's weird. It's very weird. I can't really say like Arabs or Muslims, but anyways, sorry, I'm just running out of water, and so this, bear with me, please. So 128 years, for comparison, is that this is starting with Muhammad and a bunch of like random a bunch of his friends, basically, and then after 128 years, it's the world's greatest empire. Not only that, but if you do this by comparison, Rome was founded in 753 BC. 128 years later, Rome had gone from a small kingdom in Italy to a small kingdom in Italy. This expansion for Islam is incredibly fast. Shoot. Also, if you guys remember when I was talking about the Romans, as in the Eastern Romans, and the big Roman Empire, was this thing about the domination of the Mediterranean, where being able to have access to all of this nice, calm sea for trade is super valuable. But then look at what the Arabs also have is Arabia, the Middle East, with all of the trade that goes through that. Not only does it have that, but it has all the trade that goes through Iran. Not only does it have that, but it has the bureaucracy to handle this because it's taken both the Iranian and the Roman bureaucracies, which is all makes turns this thing into kind of like a super Rome mixed with Persia, mixed with just the center of the world. It's not going to be as much of the center of the world as China, but this is going to be, a big deal. Control of this like vital area of trade by the Muslims is actually going to be what's going to drive later Christopher Columbus, almost 1,000 years later, to go west because the Muslims are blocking all of the east. So I mentioned the old Roman Persian bureaucracies. So the Arabs they set up. Oh, they don't have a bureaucracy before this whole invasion. Why would they need one? Obviously, they're living in the desert. You don't really need that. So as they come into contact with these big empires, they use the Roman and Persian systems. And over time, since the Arabs are busy fighting the Romans for the next 1,000 years, because the Romans just won't die, the this Arab empire becomes less and less Arab and more Iranian. They stop being desert nomads and they become, people of this area, Syria, Iraq, Iran, where they live in cities and which are all very wealthy because, all this trade. And so over time, you're going to see is that this big empire is going to kind of start to fall apart. It's going to start dividing. In the West, these states in Spain are going to fall apart because they don't think they're represented by all these Iranians. Same thing happens in North Africa. In Far East, it's going to also go that way. So it's going to end up becoming kind of this new Arab empire is going to actually end up becoming kind of the old successor kingdoms of Alexander, where there's the Iranian empire, kind of like Seleucus, and then eventually in a kind of Egyptian empire. Yeah, there are a lot of things that are very similar between the Muslims and between Alexander, only the Muslims last much longer. So that's the end of how far I got. Thank you for sitting through that and through my progressively less and less nice voice. Thank you very much. So I'll see you later. Remember that we're not going to have a class during the 2 weeks of APs. So, well, yeah. Oh wow, this is like nearly an hour long. All right, thank you. Bye bye.